I'm the producer and host for Earth is Our Witness, and today is another really lucky day for all of us. I want to thank you all for joining. Today we have a very special guest, but before I introduce our very special guest, I also first want to take the time to welcome our artist in residence, Art Wolfe. Art, how are you doing?
I am excellent. I just taught a workshop over in my beloved Olympic Mountains and I had a great time. So I'm fully rested and I'm ready to hear Chris talk about his work. I'm really excited.
There you go. Great. So with that, let's welcome today's very special guest. Today we have a photographer who's a National Geographic explorer and photographer, also a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, and also founder and CEO of a company called Cultural Sanctuaries that uses photography as a tool for storytelling and social change. Let's give a big round of applause to the one and only Chris Rainier. Chris, welcome to Earth is Our Witness.
Thank you very much. It's a real great honor and pleasure to be here and to see Art. We are stuck in our home grounds, so often we end up meeting in New Guinea or Morocco or places like this. So it's great to have us home and having a beautiful dialogue tonight.
You know, I got to say, go ahead, Art.
I want to say that I'm so happy to have Chris. As he just indicated, we've met each other all around the world, and he graciously wrote the introduction of one of my most recent books called Human Canvas, and you did a beautiful job. So thank you, Chris.
You're very welcome.
That's wonderful. Well, today's topic is a really interesting topic, interesting in its own right, but also interesting in the times we live in. And today's topic that Chris is going to talk about and actually show it through his work is In Search of the Sacred. So, Chris, before you start sharing, I have a question for you.
Yes.
Why this topic? Why In Search of the Sacred? What's so special about this topic, and why now that you feel we should talk about this topic?
I think we're all in search of the sacred. We're all in search of meaning for our lives, for our family, for our children, for this planet. And I think especially now, as things spin in very misaligned directions, I think we are pausing for a moment to really try and, on a very personal level, define our own lives, realizing that hopefully we all get back on track, but we don't want to get back to the same old. And I think people in that search are in the search of sacred, a search of a more profound meaning to their lives. So as a visual storyteller, I manifest that question, that search in a visual way. So what I'd love to do tonight is share some images, take people on a magic carpet ride, if we will, around the world to some of the places that I've been. I've been asking this question really since I began my professional career. So if I may, I'd love to jump in the images right away.
Great, okay. Love to jump in that also. As you share your screen, Chris, as a reminder to the audience, if you have questions, do send the questions. I'll try to pick a few. And towards the end, we will also talk about Chris's experience working with Ansel Adams. That's something that I'm very intrigued, and I'm sure many of our audience is also intrigued to know. And we will have more conversations as we go along. So with that, Chris, go ahead.
So I think I got the technology. Yes, there we are.
Yep.
So my journey into photography really began with the great honor of working with Ansel Adams, the late, great Ansel Adams in the early 1980s. And I think working with him was certainly a PhD, if you will, in f-stops and zone systems and black and white, but it was more a journey into the power of photography, the meaning of photography. You know, photography is an art form, but also photography is a social tool. And I think it's without a question, Ansel Adams' images led the conservation movement throughout the 20th century and to new heights in the 1980s when I was working with them and we were fighting a lot of the policies of the Reagan administration to try and open up the national parks. And I really learned the power of photography. And so this image for me kind of represents the beginning of that era, but also a very parallel journey that I was on what few breaks that I had from being in the darkroom with Ansel Adams. I would dash to the Southwest. And this is indeed in Utah in the Southwest. Those are ancient Indian burial sites that go down a canyon. And I began to discover these symbols, these markings on the wall and in these sacred graveyards. And it really began a journey that hasn't finished yet. And it's in search of the sacred, in search of why are we on this planet? Who are we and in what context? You know, anthropology has determined that, and science indeed has determined, as we came out of Africa some 60,000 years ago, we journeyed rather rapidly around the world, all the way to the tip of South America, up into Europe, throughout Mongolia, jumping over the land bridge. Somewhere in Mongolia, we stopped, we paused, we looked into the sky and saw that shimmering glow of stars and began the roots of religion, began the roots of asking the question, who are we and why are we here? And one of the oldest religions in the world is shamanism. And as Art knows, he's been to Mongolia, shamanism is still alive and in existence in Mongolia. So for tens of thousands of years, this original religion, if you will, has been asking that question of who am I, why am I here, and what is this all about? And in that set of questions is the fundamental question of what is sacred in our lives.
It's amazing.
You want me to continue?
Can I make a comment? And it may sound odd, but I teach a lot of workshops, and there's often, I see things beyond the original picture. And when I look at this image, Chris, I see 2 or 3 haunting faces in the complexity of the wall on the left, upper left. And it's, once I saw that, it's hard not to see it and to incorporate that in the overall image that you've created here, which is beautiful. So I just throw it out there. I mean, once I saw it, I could not look away.
I appreciate that, Art. And one of the things that I learned along the way is Ansel would often talk about Alfred Stieglitz and his project equivalency. And what I'm trying to do with my photographs is not only photograph actual sacred sites or PowerPoints, if you want to call them, but is also to capture the equivalent emotion and context that I am feeling. So, as Ansel also said, there's always 2 people present in every photograph. That is the photographer and that is the viewer. And what I'm trying to do is bridge a connection between myself and the person observing the image, but also on a spiritual level. I want, hopefully, if the image is successful, for you to have the same emotional response that I did, the same spiritual response. So this body of work is about taking you to these places, just not on the 2D dimensional visual level, but deep, deep down. And it is my hope that when you look at any one of these images, that there is a connection. It's almost as if your spinal cord has a hook on it and it connects to the center of the universe and everything that's in it. There are places to go beyond words in these images, places that I think we spend a lot of time in our subconscious.
It's amazing. That is very poetic, Chris. I mean, I even loved your description. I mean, I could just almost visualize the image without even having to look at it in some ways. You know, just hearing you talk was really cool.
Thank you. Well, let me move on. Once I left the Ansel Adams studio, for me, I was on a journey. And as I mentioned, that journey has not stopped, even in the time of COVID. I've made an effort, since we can't get on airplanes, is to wander around the Southwest desert of the United States, to go to many, many sacred sites in North America. But this image was one of the first images I took in that discovery and search way back in the early 1980s. I went and lived in Varanasi, considered without a doubt the most sacred city in India, if not the entire world. And I had this wonderful moment where I was wandering around a temple. I had my camera on a tripod, and then I heard this kind of giggling and chattering coming down the hallway. And I immediately visualized this image. So I had about 4 seconds to plop the tripod down, focus. And of course, this was pre-digital, manual, made some decisions. And this is a 1 second exposure of a group of nuns coming out. Now, I love to work in black and white for obvious reasons. I had a good teacher, but I'm also most recently enjoying going into color, a different kind of color. But for black and white, for me, black and white really expresses a dimension and a spiritual presence that is easily attainable in black and white. And I think another thing that I'm really trying to do is economize my moves. And I think Art would understand this. As you get older and you've done the 10,000 hour thing, the 20,000 hour, the 50,000, is that it becomes about economy of moves, and you pre-visualize and you visualize the image before it happens. And it's almost as Minor White, the great photo poet, once said, slow down until the object of your attention affirms your presence. And I was going slow this day with great intention, and I knew the minute I heard those voices and I saw that doorway, what was obvious was they were coming to get their sandals and their shoes. So I immediately was given a gift. And to me, this was one of the clear affirmations early on in my journey that I was moving in the right direction.
Wow.
And you were present enough to receive that gift, and a lot of people aren't. So you're wise, and it's an extraordinarily beautiful image. What for me makes it is just the halo of white on their heads. It's the anchor from which the movement of these women can be wildly out of focus, but that's where you anchor these people, and it's such a beautiful symmetrical image. It's stunning, real. And this was early on. This was taken when you were in Varanasi in what, the early 80s or mid 80s?
Yeah, 1984. 1984.
Wow. Beautiful.
That's giving away my age. That's okay. You know, and one of the things, one of those things that Ansel once said to me, and I really took it to heart, and I really want to tell the students out there this, is put off short-term gains for long-term goals. You know, you have to run several, in the olden days, miles of film through your camera, or certainly today, several billion pixels through your camera before you get into sync with pre-visualizing, with having a voice, with an intention of what you're trying to photograph. So hang in there, because if you continue down that path and that journey, you will come to the point where everything around you becomes a part of your journey, and you know how to take that photograph, and you visualize it or pre-visualize it, and the results become more and more profound. And I think Art would agree with me. It's like, you know, we're a little rusty now in the time of COVID, but I think that once you get back out on the road, I certainly feel that I'm very intentional about what I want to photograph. And I think as I get older, I simply don't raise the camera to my eye unless I know 100% that is what I've pre-visualized. Again, that economy of moves.
I agree. Totally well stated.
Thank you. Thank you. This is Cambodia. And of course, Angkor Wat is one of the most remarkable examples of a place where nature has taken over once again. And I'm always fascinated with that narrative of, You know, we have these man-made objects, but they are only a blink in time compared to nature. And I've been going to Angkor Wat since the war. In fact, I was a Time magazine war photographer for many years, and I was in Cambodia covering survivors of the Khmer Rouge, and I snuck up to Angkor Wat. The war was still going on. You could hear the shelling and fighting, and photographed there way before tourists ever got there, certainly contemporary tourists. This is a place that's about a day out of Angkor Wat. And for me, it's a very powerful image because it's almost as if you can see those roots moving. It's nature doing its job, its profound job in real time. And for me, this image just evokes that power and that sense of spirit and that sense of sacredness of nature, of the landscape, of biodiversity.
It's extraordinary. A lot of people have, you know, the fig trees that are over the more commonly visited temples.
Buddha. Yes.
Yeah, but this is so striking because just as you stated, you feel those roots expanding and wrapping around this structure, and you know that eventually the structure will succumb to it. But it is amazingly beautiful, just that symmetry, the lines, and just the strangeness of it, that comparison. It reminds me of photos I've seen and photographed down in the Mayan ruins where, you know, the
Yes.
whole jungle has taken over.
Back over. And I love that motif. It's, you know, the classic Indiana Jones motif, if you will, going into the jungle. In this project that I'm working on, In Search of the Sacred, no question, one of the places to go to is the Standing Stones in Scotland, and the whole kind of Druid period of history in the United Kingdom. And I had great honor to go there earlier this summer. And I'm also fascinated, you know, a motif that repeats itself often in my photographs is water, and also that sense of motion. You know, the concept that we take a photograph in a fraction of a second, but flipping that around and allowing the clouds to express themselves. So I got very wet, which I don't mind. I actually learned to take a plastic tarp wherever I went, and I just simply laid down on that, and over a period of time took a number of exposures, and this is the one that spoke to me. It's almost as if the energy of those megaliths is coming out of the top of the rocks. And again, I had pre-visualized this, and I was just slowly waiting for the precise moment for it to come together. And you know, for me, it's important to be a storyteller, and I'm trying to, whether I'm photographing tribes in New Guinea or the Amazon, or photographing religious sites or landscapes, is to be a visual storyteller. And I think we have a responsibility as photographers to be storytellers, to inform our audience of something beyond just the obvious, beyond just the two-dimensionality of it, but to get deeper into it and take people on a journey. You know, eventually, in photography, as you evolve further into your career, every image, regardless of where you point your camera, becomes a self-portrait. To me, this is a self-portrait of who I am.
Wow, you know, Chris, the amount of what we call, you know, words of wisdom, you know, that you're just sharing with us. Really, thank you. It's incredible.
Thank you very much. Well, as Art knows, you spend a heck of a lot of time out on the road by yourself. So you think about these things. It keeps you entertained in the evening, jotting down a journal. This image, you know, we live in one of the most sacred landscapes in the world. I travel all over the world, and every time I return to North America, I'm Canadian, so I'm going to include Canada. I am humbled by the power the raw kind of day after creation power of the landscape in the West especially, but up into Canada and along the BC coast, the British Columbia coast, even now where I am in New Hampshire with the stunning changing of the leaves. It's miraculous. You know, we tend to forget in this world of elections and COVID that we are walking on sacred ground. And who better to have told that story other than the indigenous people? So one of the trips that I did this spring through the Southwest, indeed looking for sacred sites. And this is a remarkable site in Utah. And what's remarkable is that it is a serpent, which again is a motif, a symbol that repeats itself over and over and over again around the world in indigenous cultures. But also on the solstice, the sun, a shaft of sun comes in and only hits the serpent's head. And that is only for a matter of minutes, and then the sun moves on. So this is a very sacred site to Native Americans. And, you know, the national parks and the BLM land have done a remarkable job of protecting these sites and not actually telling you where they are, which I think is good. And so, you know, many of these sites, you would have to hike in 10, 20 miles, if not more, and they're not marked. So it was a journey of perseverance. And also, if you want to kind of talk about it on a spiritual level, when I was ready, it was given to me as a gift, some of these images.
It's beautiful.
Wow.
So Egypt, Africa, my father is South African. I spent a little bit of time living in South Africa as a child. So I've always been fascinated with Africa, and very specifically the ancient monuments. So I did an assignment years ago for National Geographic, documenting not only the archaeology, but the culture that lives along the Nile. And I've been fascinated with PowerPoints, places like the pyramids or the Taj Mahal or Machu Picchu. And I always try and line the trip up to be there on a full moon and photograph all night long. So this is the morning after I spent the full moon up on the top of the pyramids. I had gained permission to be able to do that. And that third pyramid, the far right, I'd spent the night up there. The fog was quite thick in the morning, and this is literally as I'm walking back to my vehicle, I take one last look over my shoulder, and through the mist, the pyramids unfold. And obviously I had to take that photograph. It was yet another gift, yet another affirmation.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, you know, it's a beautiful way of portraying these pyramids. I mean, we're so used to having the camels in silhouette and all that, but this, it creates the illusion that they're almost ethereal, that they're just floating on the sands. And that's what's striking about it. It's a very different image of these very well-known and seen pyramids.
And that, you know, is a part of my responsibility and my daytime job as a photojournalist, as a photographer, is to go to many of these places and find them in a different light, tell a different message. And that's so often what I have tried to do. And that was really honed working for Time Magazine as a war photographer, you know, working for Outside Magazine, Life Magazine, and then eventually National Geographic is, okay, the pyramids have been photographed 1,000 times. How am I going to tell my story? What is my gift, if you will, of the storytelling technique? And so that really honed me. I no longer do assignments. I'm since I'm running out of time on a planet that is being overrun. So I no longer do commercial or photographic assignments, but I work on books and these long-term books. So this will definitely be a part of that. This image is of the Nazca lines in Peru. And again, I'm fascinated by these cultures that once were and no longer. and ancient cultures. And to me, this is one of the most primordial places on the planet. Here's a culture, the Nazca culture, that some 500-600 years ago made these remarkable marks across this desert plain. And imagine, if you will, that you took a photograph and because of circumstances, you would never be able to see the results. And these people created these trapezoids, these rectangles, hummingbirds and baboons from the jungle, all these iconic symbols. And yet the only way to view them is from approximately 1,000 feet in the air. And so I find this an absolutely fascinating place. And I've gone back a number of times. This is in a helicopter, photographing early in the morning, just as the light is racking across it. And to me, it's just, again, a reminder of these ancient markings that are scattered around the world that are very sacred, very powerful. It's almost as if you slow down, as Peter Matheson says in his great book, The Snow Leopard, and you can feel the heartbeat, the pulse of the planet, just ba-boom, ba-boom. But you have to be quiet and you have to be present. And this was one of those moments for me.
Beautiful.
Okay, moving on. Let's see what we have. This is in Turkey, Mount Erebus, or Nemrut, excuse me.
Nemrut, yeah.
Yep, exactly. And I'm sure you've been there, Art. It's a remarkable place. It's, again, that subject that I love so much about the decay of all of man's gestures and monuments, that they eventually do begin to decay and crumble and fall over and then go back into what they were before, is the elements of the earth. And so I think this is a wonderful place that represents that so much. And, you know, again, I'm always trying to look for mood. I think that's something I really learned from Ansel Adams. You know, one of the jobs that I had working for Ansel was proofing all of his negatives. He had some 60,000 negatives. So I spent 5 years going through every single negative and making a basic print. So I decided to start with his very first negative and work my way up to the very last. And what I saw were these patterns and these experiments where he would, for example, go to Inspiration Point, which is this classic spot in Yosemite Valley, year after year after year. And he would get a decent photograph, a great photograph, but he had in his mind's eye this particular type of shot. And eventually in 1944, he went up and it was a clearing winter storm. And that is one of his classic images. And it is about the mood. So again, a part of that pre-visualization is waiting, often months or years, to when the weather is just perfect. The light is just where you want it to be. The clouds, the shafts of light, even full moon light is there. And I think, you know, the dedication to the medium, and Art, you certainly are one of the great examples of that, of just constantly, doggedly in search of the perfect light, the perfect moment, the perfect gesture. And I think that is what is a key element to a good photograph.
Beautiful. And, you know, as it crumbles, it's like humans, right? Dust to dust. We're born, we live, and we die, and our monuments do the same. Eventually, or they're succumbed by the rising tide. But yeah, and that's snow in the background. So Mount Nemrut is in the winter, and now we're in Timbuktu.
Right, exactly. You know, and that's what it really is for me, is that photography not only serves to tell stories, but it's a powerful archive. And since I now have a human in one of my images, I want to talk about this. One of my great inspirations and one of my great heroes is, of course, Edward Curtis, who photographed the Native American culture at the very, I will call it, transition time. I mean, he was criticized for calling it the vanishing breed. Native Americans, of course, are alive and well and vibrant vibrant and have rich cultures. So they weren't vanishing, they were in a transition. They were, as we all like to say, cultures on the edge of a transformation. And so for me, photography also serves as a reminder of what we could lose, what we might lose, and indeed what we are losing. But what I am hoping too, and I'll talk a little later in our discussion about empowering Indigenous storytellers, but I hope these are reminders to a child in Timbuktu or the work in New Guinea that they too can once again dance the dance of their elders, wear those masks, have the tribal tattooing, wear the regalia. And in fact, what Edward Curtis's images are doing right now within the Native American community is allowing them to revitalize their traditions. They are going there to see what the costumes of the Sundance were. They're going there. The Haida canoe creators are going there to see the exact paintings that Edward Curtis documented well over 100 years ago. And so it can serve as a tool for future generations of let's not lose that culture. So for me, photography has multiple roles, and I think that's one of the most pertinent certainly for me. Now this image is from Timbuktu. It is, of course, in the Sahara Desert, the country of Mali. They have these remarkable mosques, and they are made out of adobe, and the sticks are very ethereal, very mysterious, but they are in fact very practical. They lay planks on them every spring and re-cement, if you will, do the mud adobe. But I wanted to kind of create a sense of mystery. This is on a Friday when the men come to the mosque, and this is just before a gentleman goes in and prays. And again, I'm always trying to, photograph the two-dimensional, the reality of the situation, but I'm also trying to dig away below on multiple levels and give, again, that equivalent feeling to the power of the spiritualism of whether it's Islam or Christianity or Buddhism.
It's such a haunting, it's such a surreal image too, it's just a very strikingly different image, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I spent close to 10 years documenting tribes in New Guinea, and that's in fact where Art and I ran into each other at one of the great, what they call sing-sings. These are these massive gatherings of all the tribes, thousands of them, to the point where you can't use a tripod because the ground is shaking from them doing these remarkable dances. And the first time I went to New Guinea, I fell in love with it. Ended up spending 10 years there, 6 months each year, and systematically documenting all of the tribes of not only Papua New Guinea, which is the eastern side, but Irian Jaya, which is the Indonesian side, and divided it up into many different areas and systematically worked my way around the series of islands. And this is the Malagan masks. These are death masks. These are out on the island of New Ireland. And after someone has passed away, the shamans, if you will, put these masks on. There's a gathering of the tribe, and they are baptized, if you will, into their sacred spiritual beliefs. And then they wander around the tribe, re-baptizing, if you will, people within the tribe. And so I always try and, again, as I mentioned, pre-visualize an image. And I had a vision of them sort of being in the water to be baptized. So I asked them to step out into the water. As I often do, I construct images. I do formal portraits. These are not images, for the most part, on the run. These are clearly pre-visualized images that I had in my mind's eye. And this is one that I had. And I would often spend weeks in a tribal area, building up the trust before I even brought out the camera, and then stepping into that bond of creating a relationship. They say you're only your image is only as powerful as the relationship you create. Now that relationship can be created in 4 or 5 seconds or a minute. Eye contact, compassion, but it is crucial to connect to your subject, even if it's a landscape, to connect with them and have an equivalent relationship. When I walk away from a model, if you want to call them that, I want them to have the same good feeling that I do having captured that image. So we have a win-win situation. I walk away, I've gotten my image, I've created a friendship. I want them to be able to walk away and go, well, he just didn't take an image, but he worked with me and we created a relationship. That's very important to me.
You know, Chris, it's so obvious that the Edward Curtis style is very evident in your work. And as you stated earlier, he was routinely criticized for not staging, but creating, pre-visualizing, if you will.
Yes.
And in Tim Egan's book, I think it was called The Shadow Catcher, it
Yeah.
showed how the modern day First Nations are so appreciative of the fact that he went out there and recorded their ancestors and their traditions. And in many ways, you're doing the same.
Thank you. And there's a lot of controversy around his work, and in the end, I have little time for the argument, especially that photojournalism often creates around it that they were set up. Well, first of all, put it into context. This is glass negatives with an ISO of 5. So wow. You're not going to have photojournalism as we understand it existing in that period of time. But also he was an artist. He pre-visualized. Some of his images are some of the most iconic images of traditional culture, of people, of humans. So the true test is, how do the Native Americans feel about it? And yes, there's all sorts of different discussions, but by and large, most Native Americans love his work. There's a movie by a great filmmaker, a friend of mine, called Anne Makepeace, and it's of course about Edward Curtis. The opening scene is a Plains native in their community center, and it's surrounded by Edward Curtis images. And he says it's because of these images that we're doing the Sundance again. It's because these images we are allowed to move forward in our culture. And to me, that's the most profound statement.
Great.
So I was in Turkey, I think about 2 years ago. I had been there a number of different times. I had photographed the whirling dervishes to deep frustration because, yes, I got an image, but I had pre-visualized this kind of beautiful, seductive image that really encapsulated that sense of this religious ceremony. So again, I pre-visualized, and it's a triptych. It's actually 3 images of the same archway, and the 2 images, the one on the left and right, are the same image, but just flipped. And as an artist, I have given myself permission to do that. Now, it brings up an interesting conversation in photographing. It's like some people would say, well, that's not photojournalism, or that's not documentary photography. For me, that's irrelevant. One of the big questions you ask yourself when you go into a library or a Barnes and Noble is, well, am I going to go to the fiction or the nonfiction? Of course, you have to tell your audience that this is your interpretation. This is not fact. This is not documentary. This is not nonfiction. It is my interpretation of the culture. And I think this is a modern argument that seems to have taken over photography a little bit too much. The first time I drove into Yosemite, having fallen in love for years before with Ansel Adams images, was I went, wow, it's in color. So, we look at Ansel Adams' image, we don't go, well, that's not accurate, that's incorrect. He has asked you to step into the fiction section and see the world through his eyes. And so for me, as a photojournalist and a documentary photographer, it's important for me to tell my audience what portal they're going to go through, fiction or nonfiction. This is a fiction image that I pre-visualized.
A beautiful image. It's a
And
beautiful image.
well stated. And you know, when I teach, I often use Ansel's Moonrise over Hernandez, but the pre worked on in the darkroom image to show people how flat and, you know, and it was his vision and his work in the darkroom that breathed life into it and made it magical. So the people that are purists that always ask, oh, well, did it really look that way? Or what did you do? And it's such a useless question, because enjoy the art and the emotional connection to the image, rather than want to know if you know, who walked up to Paul Cézanne in the fields of France and asked him, is that really burnt sienna? You know, they don't ask artists what colors they're using.
Exactly. Well, you know, also one of the things that Ansel often referred to as a trained classical pianist was he would often say, the negative is the score, the print is the performance. And as we know by the classic music of Beethoven, Mozart, all of these great musicians, even Leonard Cohen, hallelujah, is that it's interpreted in many different ways. So, you know, the idea that it has to be strict and only adhere to one possible outcome is ridiculous. And so, you know, open up. Take your digital negative and perform it in many different ways. And that's what I watched Ansel do many times in the darkroom, is that he would do a different interpretation of it. And I find, especially the negatives that I've done years ago, I'm going back and playing around with them and redoing the composition and the performance, because I love it. It's a different statement. This image is in Jordan, in Petra. I was lucky to be there on a full moon, and I was lucky to be invited to this private celebration that was happening at this place called the Treasury. And of course, you arrive in Petra and you have to go down a mile through this cavern, and it pops out into this classic Indiana Jones scene. And what do you behold on a full moon but 1,000 candles? And it was sublime. It was surreal. And that is merely the lights of 1,000 candles with its orange light up on the Treasury and the light of a full moon and stars above.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I was just there last fall.
Yeah, it's a remarkable place. I through National Geographic have been back to Petra probably 15, 16 times. And every time it reveals a remarkable experience, as does, and I'm going to call it Burma, as does Burma. And I know Art has spent a tremendous amount of time there. The young monks, these reclining Buddhas, quite an amazing, amazing experience. And I found his haunting stare so piercing. And in a way, he is the little Buddha beside the big Buddha. And I found, you know, I was transfixed by his gaze, and there was so much, you know, he's an old soul. You can see it.
Yeah.
Back to Egypt, I mentioned that I love to photograph on a full moon. This is, in fact, the Abu Simbel, which is in the southern part of Egypt. It was on that same assignment of photographing the archaeological ruins. And this is pre-digital. This is good old Kodachrome, and probably about a 20-minute exposure on a full moon in the middle of the night. And what's remarkable about moonlight is that it basically is a form of daylight. And so it's reflected daylight, if you will. And so the challenge was there was one guard and he had all the spotlights lit up. There was no one else around. So I went and talked to him and kind of slipped him a $20 bill. And I said, could you turn off the lights for the rest of the night? And we had this wonderful experience of just wandering around in this magically sacred place, and I photographed all night long. And what's so amazing is you see the little steps, there's a doorway, and that, of course, is this wonderful hallway where the shaft of light goes all the way down the hallway. And as you look up on the hallway, about 20, 25 feet above, you see all this French, if you will, graffiti. And I'm sitting there going, now, why is it up there? And why is it in French? Well, of course, Napoleon invaded this part of the world. They discovered many of these places, or rediscovered it, and the sand had filled up. So they were doing, you know, Jacques is here, 1850 or whatever it was. So I found that absolutely amazing. And I find Egypt a remarkable place as well. I know we're getting close on time, but this is in Sweden. I'm fascinated with the Northern Lights and always have been. So a long-term study of doing the Northern Lights, and you have no way to predict where they're going to be, when they're going to be, or if you're lucky enough to have a clear night. And again, one of those gifts, I probably took 100 shots that night, and then this gift, this phoenix, arrived out of the frigid night air and began its wings sweeping out, you know, miles and miles in each direction, and its claws just about to land on the surface of the earth. And for me, yet again, it was a gift. It was a affirmation of I could actually technically pull off a night shot with the Northern Lights, because it's pretty challenging to do. And then the privilege of being able to have this show up on my screen as a gift of this larger, if you will, sacred power that's always out there.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this may be the last image, and this is a universal signal from the ancient cultures of the past. So this happens to be in the Southwest desert of the United States, but it could just as easily be anywhere in Africa, certainly
Australia.
anywhere in Aborigines, absolutely. And, you know, this dates back some 5,000 years ago, but there are examples of this in caves in France much earlier. And of course, some of the earliest examples of cave painting, rock art, is in Australia, 50,000 years old. And what I love about this rather simple image, it's as if it's our past reaching out to us. This is, if you will, the most original selfie, the most original statement as an artist. Much of these hand gestures are in fact in caves where there's a tremendous amount of art done, and they are trying to make a statement. They're saying, I am the artist. This is who I am. This is my gesture to the future. And so when you see these haunting places, often tucked up in caves and in panels out in the middle of the deserts of Africa and Borneo and places like that, it's as if you've been given this opportunity to step back in time, and you know, you find yourself putting your hand, not a good idea to touch this original rock art, but I've found just if I can put my hand as close as it's possible to theirs, filling their hands, that for a millisecond, there's absolutely a connection to a different world. And you feel it throughout your body. And so a remarkable experience. I suggest everybody has the chance to do that. How are we doing on time?
No, we are doing good. No, I just love that. You know, thanks. I know this is probably the last image, Chris. This was excellent.
Yes.
And,
so I'll get out
yeah.
of that, back to full screen. There we go.
You know, I am so drawn towards pictographs. You know, I
Yes.
love petroglyphs, you know, the carving in the stone, but the painting on the wall is so immediate to me. And so
Yes.
I've been in some of those really amazing and private, little known, what do we call them, galleries in Arnhem Land. And to look with your eye that close to a painting on a wall that could be between 40 and 70,000 years. It's spanning time and distance, and you think of all the things that happen in known human history, and yet this predates that. And that artist, that person was there at that time. It's haunting. It's absolutely haunting. And I know from listening to you, I knew a lot about you before, but the connections and the stories and your beliefs are so synonymous with me that there is a very, very powerful connection.
Well, all I have to, thank you, Art. All I have to do is look around your studio and see masks. Of course, I've just finished a 30-year study of traditional masks around the world, and it's published. It came out last fall. So as I look back into your room and I see, of course, the Northwest Indians, the West African Burkina Faso Bua tribe right there. I love it. I love it. It's a powerful connection. And, you know, I think we're so blessed to be alive at this moment in history where, you know, there still are these ancient rhythms in the land before the bulldozers plow over it, or the last of the tribal peoples are hidden in the jungles of places like New Guinea or the Congo. But it's very fragile. You know, we're really looking at the next 10 to 15 years. And as Sir David Attenborough, with his remarkable new documentary that just came out on Netflix, has expressed that these next 10 to 15 years are the make or break of whether we continue to live in an environment that unravels, or not only do we survive, but this is what I love about traditional cultures. They say, why do you say survive? Why not say we live in abundance? Why can we not go back to a planet that is flourishing, in abundance, is nurturing us, and we are nurturing it? And it takes a lot of responsibility for every one of us, and every one of us as photographers, to use our photography as a social tool, to bear witness to what is going on. And what I really learned also from Ansel Adams, and I had the great privilege of meeting David Brower, the original Archdruid who began the Sierra Club book series along with Nancy Newhall and Ansel, is the best way to save a place is to celebrate its beauty. And I know, Art, you probably are criticized for the same thing that I am. And certainly Ansel was criticized during the Second World War. As Cartier-Bresson famously said, you know, the world is going to pot, and Ansel Adams is photographing trees and rocks. The point is, especially now that the planet is potentially going to pot, we need to lean even more into the beauty, into the sacredness, into the affirmation, and we can do that through photography. It is one of the most powerful mediums. When everybody picks up a newspaper or goes online, what do they look at first? A photograph. A photograph is an iconic moment that expresses things way beyond words, way beyond the written word.
Well said, Chris. Go ahead, Art.
Thank you.
You're good. Sorry, Parimal, we didn't give you much of a chance to chime in.
No, all good. I don't need to chime in. I need to chime in only if you guys don't talk. And, you know, this was wonderful. I had a couple of questions to ask as we wrap this up. Want to also be respectful of the time. Chris, you mentioned, you know, as we just got started, that you are the founder and CEO of Cultural Sanctuaries. Tell us a bit about that and why it is so important to work with, you know, ancient cultures.
Thank you. Well, I began my career, as I've spoken way too much tonight, about documenting traditional cultures, sacred places around the world. In 2000, I was asked, along with Wade Davis, to join the National Geographic and really change the way people perceive traditional cultures. And one of the things that we very quickly realized was, the traditional motive or a kind of narrative of National Geographic is send a white male around the world to tell other people's stories. I'm guilty of it. I've been that white male person. So I really wanted to shift that narrative. And some of the best storytellers in the world are traditional cultures. Of the 6,000 languages that exist today, 80% are oral, they're traditional. So it is indeed the passing of knowledge, the passing of sacredness from father to son, mother to daughter around that campfire at night. And it is that storytelling. So Indigenous people are some of the best storytellers in the world. So we created a program to empower Indigenous people, filmmakers, photographers, writers, to tell their own stories. And so for me, it's about getting out of the way and empowering storytellers. In 2015, my partner and I went to the Paris Climate Accord and realized we weren't doing enough. And so we formed a foundation with a group of like-minded people, and it has evolved into a global foundation called Cultural Sanctuaries. And it is about empowering Indigenous people on the front lines of conservation. So we work at the nexus of saving biodiversity, but saving and helping empower traditional cultures so they themselves can do that. Science has now proven that if you create opportunities for Indigenous people to stay on their land, they are the best caretakers. So we're really working at that juncture. And a crucial part of that is that we create a cultural center, community center in these communities, and we give them cameras, computers, and we teach photography, and they do what they know how to do best, is tell stories and pass that information on, and specifically stories about conservation, about climate mitigation. For too long, Western science has had a table where it has only been modern science. And we now live at this moment where we have to add extra chairs and let Indigenous traditional science step into that. And it is only by doing that that we will come up with the understanding of the planet and the solutions to allow humanity to live beyond the 21st century. So Cultural Sanctuaries, the website is culturalsanctuaries.org.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. So let's maybe wrap this up with one last question. Chris, you have traveled the world, you have such amazing experience and exposure and also wisdom. If there is one wish you would have for us all, one message, for humanity, if you will, what would that be and why?
Thank you. What I'd like to do to answer that question is, in fact, quote Margaret Mead, the great social anthropologist. She once said, having been born into a polychromatic world, that her greatest fear, in fact, her greatest fear for her children and her grandchildren and all of our children, is that they will one day wake up in a monochromatic world and never know the difference. We live at a crucial moment in human existence on this planet. So I want to leave everybody with that thought that all of us have to work together, use the power of photography, and let's go save the world.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Art, any final words from you before we
Yeah,
wrap this?
to echo that everybody's vote at this time in our country's history should be towards the leaders that you believe can lead us through to look at the climate, to put ever more importance on changing the way we are living and how we are treating the planet. And we are right on the cusp of change, making that happen, I believe.
Thank you, Art. And if I could add just one thing, David Attenborough was interviewed on PBS tonight about the new movie and his new book. And the interviewer said, all of us sitting at home, we can't travel the world, we can't go save these places. What's the thing that we can do to change the tide? And David Attenborough said, vote.
Absolutely.
On that note, I
Absolutely.
got to say, as we wrap this up, when we started Earth is Our Witness, Art and I, we talked about this for many years before we actually launched this in June. And the vision was, if you will, the sense of purpose was to kind of inspire creativity and compassion, and every time we have done one of these episodes with guest photographers, every time we go beyond images, beyond what we call pretty pictures, it's been magic to us. And I got to say today, Chris, thanks to you, today we achieved that in abundance. It's one of those books or movies when the conversation is so deep and layered that you have to watch it multiple times to really uncover. I'll be doing this, this particular episode for sure. I'll be watching this multiple times because not only are your images so beautiful and poetic, but the meaning of it, the purpose has so much depth and wisdom to it. I'm just going to urge all of our audiences to also do this, and please help us, spread the word. And with that, I'm going to say a big round of applause and thanks to both Art, you, and to our guest, Chris. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Great
Thanks,
honor.
Parimal.
Thanks to
All
the
right.
audience. Thanks.